One of the reasons that Dreamweaver has become such a popular program and established a dominance in the world of website design, it's partially because it's known as a WYSIWYG editor, i.e. what you see is what you get. And what that acronym points to is the fact Dreamweaver does allow you to create a website almost purely visually. That said, as the modern web has developed, the tools required to build such a modern website mean that a purely WYSIWYG website editor wouldn't actually provide enough tools. As an aside, Adobe do make another sort of website editor, or creation tool should I say, and that's called Adobe Muse, where creating a website is purely visual. However, here now with Dreamweaver, yes, we still retain the visual aspect of creating a website, but also, in parallel, we do get other tools. And that's what we're going to look at in this tutorial, and in fact, the next tutorial too. We're going to look at these 4 buttons across here: Code, Split, Design, and Live. In this tutorial, though, we are predominantly going to focus on our Design view, this 3rd button along. However, just before we get to that stage, do notice when you have got your Design button selected, we see just above any related files that are used to create this particular site. For example, we've got these 2 buttons, Source Code, and you'll see by that tooltip popping up there that the source code is the underlying code for the top level document. And if we wanted to modify this code, then we would just simply click on here. I'm not going to for the moment. I'll leave that until the next tutorial. However, do notice just to the right, there is a related file, and this related file is related because this CSS text file dictates a menu item further down our page. However, even though we are looking at our design view, which we would expect to be totally visual, clicking on here now automatically switches our view from just our purely design view into what's known as a split view, whereby my design is on the right hand side and the code is just for this CSS file, is over here on the left hand side. And do remember that, yes, this CSS code is part of our design, but only part of it. Whereas if I click on source code now, well, this code that we see in our split view relates to everything else on our page. Anyway, as I say, we'll get back to that later. And as I referred to a few moments ago, we do see these tabs here. If we want to just simply look at the code without looking at any visuals, then of course we would click on Code. We've just seen what this split view looks like, as it provides a separated view on our screen of the code and the visuals of the design. And of course, clicking on Design only displays the visuals. But also just to the right, we have this Live button. Selecting this, as we've seen in an earlier tutorial, does provide us with a working view of what our website will look like, and additionally, any navigation or rollover images, whatever, will work. Whereas if you are just looking at the design view, then none of that will work. Now you can't have failed to have noticed when we do click on our Live button, automatically we get to see 2 further buttons, Live Code and Inspect. If I select Live Code, then we revert back to our split view, but it means if I work on our design view and roll my mouse over a particular element, then that particular code will highlight. And if I want to take this a step further, then I can activate this Inspect button. Okay, now I'm going to leave all that for the following tutorial, so let me come back over to our Design View button and select it. Now, despite it being called Design View, and I keep referring to this as a visual view, this doesn't mean that we are restricted to only editing visuals, i.e. photographs. Of course, we can edit text too. However, I do want to show you that when we select a particular element on our page, then as we've seen previously, the Properties Inspector, the Properties panel that we looked at in the previous tutorial, well, that Properties panel will automatically update to reflect the particular element that we are looking at. For example, if I select my top image here, then immediately the Properties Inspector updates to reflect that I have selected a particular type of element on my page, i.e. this image. And as a consequence, we now see further options down on the Properties Inspector. And therefore, from a purely visual point of view, using this design view allows me to make various edits. And immediately I've spotted that I do actually want to make a change to this image running horizontally across the top. If I come down here on our Properties Inspector, I'll see in pixels the dimensions of this image. We have a width, and at present the height is set to 144. However, you'll notice that the height of 144 actually figures in bold, and what that's telling me is the actual dimensions of this image are different, and in particular in the height. and therefore if I want to correct this, then I can click on here and this resets my image to the original size. I'll do it now. Consequently, the height here now expands by 7 pixels, up to 151 pixels, and as a result of this, the height field is now not in bold. Okay, now I know that's a very simple example, but that is an example of what we can do even when we are in the design view. We don't need to alter the code in any way. We don't need to dig into the code. We don't need to look at any of the other tabs. As we've seen, we can adjust this or correct it here. And then once I deselect the focus of this photograph by clicking outside of it, then the Properties Inspector reverts back to what we saw a few moments ago. Okay then, so that's one thing we can do with images. I'm going to scroll right down to the foot of our screen, so I'll click on here, and that takes me down to the bottom of our page. Now just to the right of this photograph, we see some text. Now this text is what's known as lorem ipsum. I know it looks like Latin, but actually it's just junk filler text. We'll make this more relevant as we progress. For the moment, do notice above though, we have that single word, restaurants. And presently, all of this text, starting with restaurants and finishing with that junk filler text, well that's all embedded within a paragraph tag. And we can see that if we come down here, looking at our format field, we can see that this is presently set to paragraph. However, what I want to do, so that this website becomes more search engine friendly, I'm going to alter that one word restaurants, and I'll change it to a term that people searching Google, for example, would be using when they are looking for restaurants in Stockton Heath. Now I'm going to do that in a second. First of all, I want to click on our code button so that you can see that this text is embedded within paragraph tags. There's our opening paragraph tag, and over here on the right is our closing paragraph tag. Okay, I'll go back over to our design view again by clicking on the design button. Right, I'm going to change our text now from restaurants to something more search engine friendly. So I'm guessing a phrase people will be using when people are looking for Stockton Heath restaurants is in fact actually that, Stockton Heath restaurants. So now with that phrase, to try and make this more search engine friendly, and because my cursor is within that phrase, then once more I can come down to format here, click on that drop reveal arrow, and then with this resulting dialog, I can change this from paragraph and then give it a heading 1 tag. Adding heading tags like this really does help your search engine optimization. Perhaps using heading 1 though isn't right, because heading 1 should really be at the top of your page somewhere. And because this is at the bottom of our page, well, I want to change this to a heading 2 tag. So I'll click on here once more and change it to heading 2. Okay, so that's what we could do with our HTML when we are using this design view. But also remember, we've talked about in the previous tutorials how HTML runs hand in hand with the CSS. And therefore within our design view, by coming down to the properties panel once more, I can click on this CSS button. And once I do, as we've seen before, the functions within our properties panel now change, which means if I want to edit a CSS rule, an already established CSS rule, then I can do by clicking this edit rule button. For example, my font size at the moment for all the fonts on the page is set to 12 pixels, but if I want to alter this, then by coming to this font size field and clicking on this drop reveal arrow, well, I could change it to 10. Now in fact, if I just move this dialog box up here a little bit, then you'll see the text on our design view a little bit better, and therefore now if I come back down here and click on apply, then automatically you'll have noticed that all the text on our page now takes on this overall size of 10 pixels. Now in fact at the moment I think that's too small, so I'm going to change this back. I'll click on here once more and revert back to 12 pixels, and then hit apply. And then to apply this, I'll click on OK. Right then, we're back to where we started. Well, certainly with our text size. Right, I'm going to finish up here for this tutorial, now that we've looked at a few things that we can do here within the design view, and in parallel, as and when we need to, and flick over and view either the code view in isolation, or we could split our screen so that we see the code and the design. Right, as I say, I'm going to finish up here, and in the following tutorial, we're going to look at those other buttons.